Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How? What a question. How is everyone doing? Seems like every week we are crossing a new red line into straight-up fascism. So, I don't know. Hey, if you are in a government job where you can slow things down, or in an important job somewhere where you can slow things down, maybe do that. Not much I can do here from Los Angeles, I suppose. I guess, Naomi and I are going to do some fundraising. But, not a lot of slowdown I can do when my job is podcaster / TV writer, film writer who sells projects that never get made. Not a ton. Felt good when I started doing this job. Back when I moved to New York, I was like, oh, this is didn't know the world was going to go through a paradigm shift into Nazism. Anyway, I'll tell you this, here's what else I can do. Try, obviously not here in this introduction, but in the body of these episodes, try to give you some relief from the unending hell of the 21st century by having interesting conversations with artists I love. And today's episode is no different. Today is Tim Midyett. And if you don't know who Tim is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from Montana, musician Tim Midyett started the band Ein Heit in 1985 with his friends, and 2 years later, they changed their name to Silkworm. In the 20 years the band was together, they released over 24 albums, EPs, and singles on a variety of labels, including CZ, Matador, and Touch and Go. In 2005, Silkworm stopped performing after their drummer Michael Dahlquist was killed in a car accident. Tim and Silkworm's guitarist Andy Cohen, though, would go on to form Bottomless Pit, who released 4 albums and EPs on the wonderful record label Comedy Minus One. And, most recently, Tim has been writing and performing with his latest group, Mint Mile. This was wonderful. Tim's music, Silkworm, has been very important to me since I was in high school. This is pre-internet, folks. So, basically, what happened in those days was you would get into a band. So, Pavement was kind of this kind of keystone for me. And then you would get compilations with that band on it, and you would find other bands through that, or you would read liner notes and see who they thanked, and you would go to the CD store and order that. And I think that's how I came across Silkworm. And holy shit, are they a great band. Still today, 2025. Tim's still making good music. I haven't listened back to it yet, so I don't know what we talked about, but I remember it being a jovial, enjoyable chat, and so I hope you enjoy this. Tim's a cool dude. Coming up on the show, stay tuned. So many good interviews. A lot of people from the world of comics lately. Both mainstream and indie. Jamie McKelvey, Daniel Warren Johnson, Anders Nilsson, Jeffrey Lewis. Who else? Bob Mould. I was doing so many interviews with musicians that I want to take a little bit of a break, but we had Tim, Bob Mould, Josh the Tumor, who created one of my favorite shows last year, Say Nothing. So stay tuned for those, but for now, let's talk to Tim.
It's a wild time. I mean, I don't know. I always think like with all this stuff with Trump and everything, which I'm not downplaying it at all. But I'm like, I was born in 1968, and 1968 was a pretty fucked up year. There's a lot of stuff that happened in that year in particular that was just like, it would have been like mind blowing today, So, I think it's just kind of a cyclical thing, and we're in one of those cycles right now where stuff's going to get really, really weird for a while, probably.
Yeah. I mean, 2 things. One, I'll start with this. What was your earliest, because sure, you're born in 68, there's the tumult of 68, but you're really conscious probably in the early 70s, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And the vibe had changed by then, question mark, into more of a
Hmm.
cynic. Again, this stuff is all handed to me. I'm a little younger than you, so it's all handed to me by fiction, by TV and movies, and kind of by books. But it feels like everyone's
Yeah.
like by the 70s, everything was really cynical, and it didn't like the tumult was gone. But I don't know. Like, do you remember early
Yeah.
on like how it felt? I mean, I don't even know how if what was it like even in Montana?
Yeah. And I mean, I, grew up in a pretty, at that time, pretty isolated place. And I was born in Havre, Montana, which is way up north, like 30 miles from the Canadian border. It's called the High Line up there because the railroad, I think it's because the railroad that went through there is called the High Line. But it's real desolate. And Havre is like sort of the oasis in the northern part of Montana, which isn't saying much. But it's a college town, and there were people there who were fairly erudite, and there was their college radio station there, and I actually was a baby there at the same time that some of my friends later in life from Missoula, the people I was in the first good band I was ever in with, Ein Heit, they lived there at the same time, but they were like 6 or 7 years older than me. So, but anyway, it's like, I don't know. I think it was easy to be pretty isolated from things there. I was just thinking about that in terms of music in particular. Like my parents, they didn't listen to Neil Young or Bob Dylan or even the Beatles or the Stones or anything like that. They were listening to, really mainstream type stuff like Mamas and Papas, or, they wouldn't listen to Willie Nelson. They wouldn't even know about that. They would listen to like Chris Christopherson or Rita Coolidge or Seals and Crofts or something like that, So it's like, it was pretty isolated. And I think it was possible to be kind of not that connected to what was going on in the rest of the world. Montana typically is about 5 to 8 years behind the rest of the country.
Okay.
Yeah. So, long story short, I remember the bicentennial where, I was probably 7 years old. And, I remember, well, I think, no, let's see, bicentennial. What year was that? 1976. Yeah. So I was like 7. And, I remember just being a kid padding around in Montana, but it was just a different vibe there probably than a lot of other places.
Yeah.
I didn't get on an airplane until I was 18, so I didn't really know much about the rest of the world. When I went off to college, that was a big deal. I was 18 and I drove out with a friend of mine who went to Northwestern too, came out here. But that was the first time I'd ever been. I may have been to Seattle before that, but that's about it. So yeah, kind of a cloistered life in a weird way.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So the rest of the world, like when I was a kid, I think politics was. My parents talked about it, and I remember in 4th grade, maybe there was this like school. It was like the '88 election, and I remember the school had a in your classroom that you had a little election to see who would win, and you voted by how your parents voted.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember I voted for Dukakis because that's who.
Sure, of course.
Like that's
a
my
Democrat. But yeah, I actually remember going to a caucus or something like that, and we lived for a very little while in Washington. It was the second place I lived, Richland, Washington, which is not a good place to live, really. I don't think, but it's the home of the largest nuclear reservation in the United States, so they have the most nuclear waste in the U.S. is being stored there. So hopefully I didn't catch anything, during the year or so we were there. But we bounced around a lot when I was a kid. But I remember going to, I think it was a caucus meeting or something with my dad. And I remember sitting on his shoulders. And I remember he joked about voting for Nixon. And when I came home, I was like, Dad says he's voting for Nixon to my mom, and she's like, what? And he's like, oh, no, that was a joke, like it was the last thing in the world he would have done. So, yeah, I don't know. Like I was pretty aware of politics from a very early age. because my parents were, are liberal, and they were bemoaning kind of the state of things, I guess, during that time. I remember when Carter got elected for sure. And I was pretty engaged with that. But culturally, Missoula is this weird super weird college town in Western Montana. So it was a fairly, I don't want to say a unique environment because it's a college town. Most people know what those are like. It's not dramatically different from Oberlin or something, but it's nowhere near a big city, which makes it a bit more isolated kind of experience, probably. Yeah.
And the fact that you were saying like you were what, like 8 years behind the rest of the United States too. It makes me feel like you were still, when you were a kid, you were still growing up in kind of like the idyllic feel of the 60s.
Maybe, yeah.
Like there's the hangover.
Yeah, it definitely, Missoula was a very progressive town in particular. And I mean, for Montana, it's like the San Francisco of Montana, or that whole of the Mountain West. It's the place that's like that. But Moscow, Idaho is similar, college town. But so I don't want to downplay the kind of engagement of people there, but culturally, so politically, I think it's pretty much of the time, but culturally, it was definitely behind the times then, because who was going to play there? Hardly anybody ever played there. You could get records and you could get books because they would filter in from college students who would come there and need money and sell their record collections or whatever. And I started working at a record store when I was 13, a good one, Rockin' Rudy's there. And that was invaluable for me, to discover stuff. And there was another good independent store, Music Magic, where I bought a bunch of records and stuff. But, you kind of had to find your own stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you hooked in to the vibe? Were you like, or were you kind of like, I was pretty closed off as a kid, and I was like, I was just in my head a lot of the time. So I didn't, the world was going on around me and I was kind of just like off my own.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I was sort of like that. I mean, I had friends and stuff, but
oh, sure. I wasn't a loser. I had friends. What are you implying?
Well, and I played sports and stuff. So, I had these kind of built-in things, but I didn't necessarily have a lot in common with the people I played sports with. They'd just be like a bunch of meatheads from the other side of town or whatever. And I'd be on the baseball team with them. But, I think that for me, that whole thing started because I was good at school and I played sport. I was competent at sports. And that was kind of my life until I was probably about 10. And that's when I really got into music heavily. Like before that, my parents, whose record collection I was just running down, they actually had some good stuff. Like my dad had all these old 45s that were like Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis and Buddy Holly and Elvis and stuff like that. And I discovered a little box of these one time, and I played the shit out of them. I played Buddy Holly stuff over and over again, or like Great Balls of Fire. My brother and I were like, great, because that was like, oh, he's talking about balls, and so we were like fascinated by it. But it wasn't until I was about 10 that I sort of started buying records. The first record I ever got was ABBA's Greatest Hits Volume 2, which I still love. I still love ABBA. And then I got Blondie Parallel Lines. But that was the first record I bought with my own money. I got the ABBA record with the gift certificate that my uncle gave me. But, that's pretty good for the first two records you get. And then there was a long, dark period of trying to find stuff that I'd heard on the radio that was okay. And there wasn't very much in there. And then I sort of found my way to music that I had some kind of real affinity for, on my own. But that took a while. I mean, I was probably 12 when I found the Police or whatever the gateway was,
Hold on, that's only 2 years. You're like, you went from 10 to 12. Like, that's not that.
It's a long time when you're a kid.
It's not that long to find your musical identity as a tween,
I guess. But I was still kind of trying to figure out what it all meant. And then I think I heard Psychedelic Furs, probably when Forever Now came out. And I loved them. Like, and I didn't know what it was, you know. And by that time I was familiar with punk rock and new wave and all that and heavy metal. And I was like, I'm not any of these things, you know. But then I heard that band and I was like, wow, this band's awesome. And this is weird music and I really like it. And I don't know what it is, you know. And I bought their other two records after I bought the popular one. And I read an interview with Richard Butler from that band, and he was talking about influences and stuff, and he mentioned the Velvets. And I had no idea who Velvet Underground was. I didn't know who Lou Reed was. Yeah. I was like 14. So and I was working at the record store, and a copy of the first Velvets record came in, and it hadn't been reissued yet or anything, so they were not common. You know, like you wouldn't expect to see it. And I was like, oh, I got to take this home and listen to it. And so I can really concentrate. And I think I played it like 5 times that night or 6 times in a row. Like I just couldn't believe how awesome it was. And it makes sense that I would go there from the Psychedelic Furs. Like there's a connection there. It's hard to describe, but they're both kind of mysterious, sort of off on their own bands that only sound like themselves, you know. But that was really eye-opening to me, hearing that record, and changed my life. And still, it's probably my favorite record ever. But
do you think
the next day,
do you think you were searching for an identity?
Kind of. Well, I just didn't know what to call myself or what it was that I liked. And I was, you know, at that time, it was like I'd moved past the Police. I was probably, you know, I liked like English beat and stuff like that. Because I remember seeing a Police video and Sting had on an English beat T-shirt, and so I checked them out, and I'm like, oh, this band's better than the Police, you know. I like this, and it was kind of just a step-by-step thing. But yeah, everyone else seemed to have an identity, right? Everyone else seemed to be like, I'm a punk, you know, and I'm going to wear a leather jacket, and I'm going to, you know, have a punk haircut and stuff. And I didn't feel that, and I definitely didn't feel new wave or metal or anything. So I was like, I don't even know what this is. But then I remember the day after I listened to that record, I didn't bring the Velvets record back to the store. I kept it and I paid for it, you know, obviously, because I was honest. But I got to the store and there were a handful of guys there who were college age guys who probably liked Talking Heads or whatever. And they're like, hey, how you doing? You know, just as I came in, and I was like, great. I discovered the Velvet Underground last night. And I don't know what I expected, but one guy was just like, oh yeah, Lou Reed. And that was it. You know, and at that moment I was like, oh shit. This sounds like the universe to me. And it's not a thing, I guess, you know. And that was kind of the first moment where I realized, oh, maybe I'm off on a tangent here, and I shouldn't expect, you know, what I want to hear to be reflected in, you know.
Did you want them to be as excited as you, or did you want them to, I don't really mean it like this, but like welcome you in to like, yeah, like you listen to the Velvet Underground, you're one of us now.
I think I didn't really care even at that age too much what their reaction was, but I was surprised by it. You know, I thought, oh, this is clearly the shit, you know, like for this kind of music, this is clearly, to me at the time, not like I'm so smart or whatever. And lots of other people had already, you know, had these records and played them to death and loved them and everything. But, you know, for me, it was brand new. And for them, it was just like, oh, whatever, you know?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Do you think this was also giving you outside of like, what's my musical identity? I was thinking about like an identity at school, because you said you were into sports.
Yeah.
Well, okay, here's the thing. Yeah. Were you into sports and you like sports, or did you do sports because you could play sports? Whatever. I mean, what were you even playing? A
little of both. I played baseball and basketball and soccer, and I was coordinated, right? So I wouldn't say I was I definitely wasn't a great athlete. but I was good and I was competent. And for certain things, I was good. Like I played catcher in baseball. I was good at that. That's a kind of a specialized thing. Or like, I was a good defender in basketball. I wasn't a great scorer or anything like that. And I didn't work at it. So it was kind of more something I did, yeah, to be honest. And then I remember when I was about 13, I think, freshman, probably in high school, I had to decide, you couldn't do everything. And it was sports or arts, and I like to act. And I was into music by that point. So I was like, okay, I'm done with sports. I'm just going to do this other stuff now.
Was it easy to shed that identity? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm done. It's
Yeah,
not really, it's
yeah,
not me.
yeah, yeah. It was because I wasn't gripped about it. I had friends who were very good athletes, great soccer players and stuff. My class, though, it was me. It was made a little easier by the fact that my high school class was absolutely indifferent to regular sports. Like, we had a bunch of great soccer players, but soccer wasn't even a high school sport, sanctioned high school sport at that time. So they were all in this independent travel league. But like football, no one gave a shit. My football team at my school when we were seniors was 0-10. Could barely even field a team. Like we were just all like stoner soccer players and musicians. That's it. And no one gave a shit about basketball or any of that stuff. The girls' basketball team was pretty good, but the dudes were just like, whatever, who fucking cares. So, which was cool. That was my speed sort of at the time. Yeah.
It is, but it seems so foreign from my experience of high school where sports was the main thing.
Yeah. Well, it still was for some kids. And there were in the individual things like wrestling and stuff, there were kids that were like aces and state champs or whatever. But for some reason, my class was like from the perspective of like the athletic director of school was like bottom of the barrel. Like I remember going in as freshmen. We're freshmen, right? So we're 13 years old. We go into the gym and there's this little like mini assembly of all the dudes in the freshman class. And the football coach was this guy named Van Troxel, which is like the greatest football coach name of all time. But anyway, he was like, he gets us there, and Van was like, Mr. Troxel was like, yeah, so a lot of people are saying, he built up to this. A lot of people are saying that this class is the worst athletic class to ever come through Missoula County high schools. I say you can prove them wrong. And we just kind of looked at each other like, I don't care. Sure.
Inspiring.
Yeah, exactly. There were like 5 people who wanted it to be good and then no one else cared. So yeah, it was easy to give up.
Yeah. Okay. Cause I'm trying, like, do you think, I don't know how you answer this, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you think if it had been a thing, you might have gravitated more to athletics versus the arts? If this is the dichotomy you're given as a kid? Or do you think you naturally would have just like, well, I'm not going to be great. Like you were, I guess I'm asking, were you self-aware enough or did it kind of just naturally fall away?
Oh yeah. No, I knew I didn't have the, like my brother was a very good athlete in high school. Like he was all state and stuff on the basketball team and could have played probably D2 basketball. He went to Notre Dame and he got asked about walking on and stuff there. So, he was really good but he practiced all the time, like out in the snow, backboard on the garage, shooting. And I'm not going to do that. Like music was that kind of a thing for me where I got really started playing bass when I was 12 or whatever. And it just became, this lifelong, whatever, affliction or obsession or whatever it is.
Was there something about the bass that spoke to you, or were you just more interested in the sound? Or, I mean, what was it about?
That's a good question. I started playing my dad's acoustic guitar and learned some chords and stuff. And then I think it's just that the very first band I was ever in was with my friend Ben, who was the first drummer ever in Silkworm. And this guy, Keir Graff, who lives here in Chicago now, actually, he played guitar. And I think bass was just the other thing. And I was like, oh, well, I'll just try doing that. So I started doing that. And that was it, and I still consider myself primarily a bass player. I mean, that's something I know. Guitar, I don't even know if I'm really good at it. I just can do what I can do. But bass, I know I'm good at it. I have the ability to do it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if it's interesting. I was about to say it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm about to say could be very banal. That, there's a typical instrument of someone who is more in the background, despite, well, maybe not. I was just thinking, as Paul McCartney is probably looming large. When I was a kid in the 80s, right, it's mostly like the guitarist who is the front person. But then again, you're growing up with Paul McCartney as this kind of...
Well, in the Police, I started listening to Police when I was like 10 or 11, right? So,
right, okay.
And that obviously he was the main dude, or even the stuff that drove me into like English beat. That's all about, to me, that's all about the bass playing. And even like a band like Psychedelic Furs, very heavy bass sound. And once I got into other stuff like British post-punk and stuff like that, that's it. Joy Division, Cure. I wasn't a huge Cure fan back then, but I like them a lot now. Gang of Four, Public Image, Metal Box. I remember hearing Metal Box for the first time, blew my mind. So that, to me, that's where the action was always,
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I totally take that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, from a 70s standpoint or something, or even mainstream music, mainstream music in the 80s hardly had any bass on it, a lot of it, because we kind of moved out of like disco, which is very heavy bass, into like whatever morphed out of that kind of pop music. Like Prince records hardly ever have a lot of bass on them, or they have low end, but they don't have bass guitar as much. And a lot of the synth kind of, Ghostbusters or whatever, that shit was all that, there was no need for bass on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So wait, when you're in school, like around this time when you're like, sports, whatever, I don't need it. Like music is like looming large in your life. Are you like, does it help give you some kind of identity at school? Like, oh, he's the guy who's into music. Do you care about that even? Does it matter to you?
No, it probably did, to answer your first question. And the second question is, I don't remember ever caring, ever. And I think that came out of, which has served me in good stead. It's part of the reason I think I'm still at it now, is because it's not about anything outside of like here and like the band, like this is number one. Not to be a dick about it, but if it works for me, then it works. But the secondary consideration, and really the only other one that matters, is the band. I want them to feel engaged in what they're doing. I'm not interested if the band's not interested, right? So that's it. And I think that just came out of growing up, like I said, in a kind of an isolated place, but also a place where you couldn't count on other people being into what you were into. The guys I played with, we were totally in sync. Like the older guys who were in Ein Heit were Joel's 3 years older than me, Joel Phelps. And then the other guys in the band, the oldest guys, were maybe 6 years older than me. But we were in sync, pretty much musically. So it wasn't something I had to think about. But I couldn't really count on anyone outside of that, getting it necessarily. So yeah, I don't remember ever giving a shit.
Interesting. You didn't care about fitting in, or did you fit in any way? Like people already like accepted you?
I don't know. I think, yeah. I mean, I'm an able-bodied, white, straight male. So, it's not like I'm going to have a lot of trouble, like getting along with people. And socially, I could talk to people and stuff. So I don't remember being too exercised about it. And I don't remember ever feeling like I was just part of any particular group. We had all the normal groups, the preps, and we called the Heshers dirt heads. That was our name or dirts for short. So I wasn't a Hesher. I wasn't a preppy. I wasn't a whatever, but I kind of had friends in all those groups, and I drank and did drugs and stuff. So like that was all like I was kind of intermingling with a bunch of different groups of people. I felt like, but I don't remember being lonely, and I don't remember being maybe a little while, when I first got there when I was 13 or 14. But then I started being in bands, and there's a built-in community to that for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I was just obsessed with being an individual. And so it was just like, I had like, this was my music, and this is the thing that made me special in a world that seems like was just because I suburbs of Pennsylvania is where I'm from, and it just everything seemed flat there.
Yeah.
And you had to travel
Totally.
anywhere. Like the cool record store was still like a half hour outside of town at least.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I really had it pretty lucky because I also working at this record store was massive. It was easily the best job I could have possibly had as a high schooler there. And even beyond that, I think it's probably a good place to work today. But I discovered so much stuff just by picking out, records from the racks and, like, oh, you're John Coltrane, Live at the Village Vanguard again, which is one of my favorite records of all time. I probably heard it when I was 15 years old, and that's weird. Like most of the time you wouldn't, and I certainly wouldn't have heard it on the radio, and not in Montana, especially, but there it was, and I could borrow it and play it and get into it and realize it was something new and different. And almost all of the Touchstone stuff that is, when I think back at it, I encountered, when I was pretty young, thanks to that place, thanks to Rudy's.
Yeah. So wait, what's the timeline? You're born in, did you say Havre? Is that it?
Havre, yeah.
Havre.
Yeah, it's like spelled like Le Havre, but it's Havre. Okay. But that was December 68. I just turned 56. So, yeah. And then we lived in Richland. We lived in a house up in the woods, kind of on the East Lake Shore of Flathead Lake in Montana. Lived in Helena, and then moved to Missoula. I was probably in third grade, so I was probably like 8 or something like that. And then I was there the whole time. So Missoula, until I graduated from high school.
Yeah. Why are you moving around so much before third grade?
Good question. Yeah, I would ask my dad that question.
Well, what'd they do for a living?
My dad bounced around a little bit, and he was always kind of a wannabe entrepreneur, and eventually was an entrepreneur, and ended up, working his way into retirement by, owning his own business and stuff. So it worked out in the end. But yeah, he just bounced around and he found these jobs. He worked for he had like a sociology degree. And so he would get government jobs working for government agencies, doing studies about this and that. And he did that in Montana, and he did it in Washington as well for a while. So yeah, we just bounced around for, in my early years, a bit. Yeah.
When you say entrepreneur, like in my mind, I think of like a TV, like someone like wild-eyed, like I'm gonna make this work, like that kind of like this is my big break. This is the one that's gonna work. And then is it like that, or is it more, I don't know, human, down to earth?
It's funny. We were just talking about this yesterday. I called my dad, and we were talking about a bunch of stuff, but this came up, and I realized he and I are very much alike in this regard, because he's the same way. He just kind of took whatever opportunity landed in front of him to see if he could make something of it. If he saw something he thought was interesting, he would go try it, and that's exactly what I've done with my life. But unlike him, he had a bunch of stuff that he tried. And for me, it's really only been two things as in my professional life. I started off, I got an electrical engineering degree when we decided in the Worm not to, beat our brains out touring and stuff. And I got an EE. I moved to Chicago. Andy was already here from the band. And I worked at Shure Microphones as a design engineer. But then I realized that wasn't going to get me where I wanted to get financially. So I went into trading, futures trading, on the back of a friend of mine being in futures trading. So this kind of was a Wild West thing when I started doing it, electronic futures trading. And I did that for 8 years, beat my brains out doing that, which was hard, fun, weird. And then from that, I went into digital marketing, which another friend of mine was doing. And it was the fairly early days of that, maybe 13 years ago, so that's it. That's my whole professional thing. But I basically, the mindset was just like my dad. Like, I have to make money. I'm not driven to be an architect like my brother, who went to school for architecture and now he's an architect, straight up, or someone who goes into nursing or something. It's their lifelong thing. I don't have anything like that with regard to money.
What about when you were younger? Did you have like a specific desire of something you wanted to do with your life? Or was it just this, like you said, with your, an opportunity was put in front of me and I'm like, yeah, that sounds fun.
Yeah, I did. Music was always kind of the main thing on my mind. But I sensed pretty early that that making a career out of it was something different than actually making music. And certainly once we moved to Seattle, that was at the time, it was a huge pain in the ass because there were like a million bands. And then 6 months after we got there, 10 came out, and then Nevermind came out, and then it was like, because we moved there in 1990, and I think that's when those records came out. I don't know, but it was just like, it was already a clusterfuck there because it was, the whole Sub Pop thing was huge among people who knew anything about independent rock music at all. But then that happened, and then it was just like, oh, every dipshit from every far corner of the U.S., was coming in there and buying all the flannel shirts and like growing their hair out and, trying to be the next Alice in Chains or whatever. So it was an awesome thing in retrospect because it absolutely made it obvious what the game was. As soon as we got there, we saw, oh, if you want to like really like make this a thing that you do all the time, you're going to have to do it a certain way. And we're like, yeah, no, we're going to do it our way, and whatever happens, happens, basically.
Okay, wait. How conscious was the move to Seattle? Was it like, oh, this is a scene. This is a scene, and we need to be part of a scene?
Oh, no. Right. Yeah, no. No, we hated scenes because, we were always, from this jump, man, like in Missoula, there were a couple punk bands and stuff, but we were always, Ein Heit, the band we were in before Silkworm, me and Andy and Joel, that's where we learned how to be in a band, and it was very insular. All we cared about was ourselves, and we did exactly what we wanted to do, and that was it. Like, if people showed up and they liked it, cool. If they didn't, fuck them. And that was the attitude of the older guys in the band, and we picked up on that, and that became our thing, 100%. So the main thing for us was we wanted to play more, because in a town, if you're just in a little town, and we had to drive 200 miles to get to Bozeman to play, so it's like your options are very limited. You can play once every 6 or 8 weeks without burning out your crowd, maybe, or something like that. Right. So we're like, we want to play more, and we want to put out our music on something besides cassettes, and that we have manufactured by the local place or ourselves. So we're like, we do have to get out of here if we want to keep doing this, and especially if we want to travel and play. So that's why we moved to Seattle. It was the closest big city. Yeah.
Okay.
And, at the time, when we started touring, we would go to Chicago or San Francisco and be like, holy fuck, this is like 100 times better. People aren't angling to try to get record deals all over the place. They're just doing it, But in retrospect, I do think it was good for us to go to a place that was so rabidly ambitious in a commercial sense, generally speaking, because it showed us what we didn't want.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm curious about, because you want to professionalize it, I assume, right? You would like to, if possible, make this what you do. And at the same time, what was it you saw that kind of turned you off, or the rest of the guys in the band off of that?
I didn't see a single band that was doing that I thought was doing the right thing ever. Like, including, all respect to Pearl Jam, long career, storied, very well regarded band. A lot of people like them, but including them, including Nirvana even, I mean, I think, I mean, that record was huge, and you can see why. You could hear it. The instant that record came out, I remember we were playing a shitty show in Spokane, and I was shooting pool with Michael, and something came on the radio, and I realized it was Nirvana. It was Teen Spirit, and I'd never heard the recording of it before, and instantly I was like, "Oh, this band's going to be huge." And then I was like, "This song's too long." By the time it was over, but you could tell. And same thing. I remember seeing the video for whatever the fuck the first thing off 10 was. It's a live video, and Eddie Vedder's climbing on the stacks. It's a great video because it makes the song like twice as good as it actually is.
Is it even
But
flow?
maybe even flow, yeah. But
I'm now back in like my sixth grade body, and I'm like,
I think you're right. I think it was even flow. But is that the jugadoo? I think that's it. But I was like, oh, these guys are going to be huge. They're going to be huge, And I didn't even like it. I was just like, this has a thing going for it. But I didn't admire any of that music so much. I liked In Utero a lot, and I like Bleach now more in retrospect than that one record, then Nevermind. But clearly they were onto something. But I didn't see anyone doing that and thinking, oh, I want to be like them. There were zero bands. I wanted to be like the Tree People, or our buddies in Jessamine or Engine Kid. Like those were the bands that I loved, and they were very similar in that they were just like us. We're doing our thing here, and I don't know what's going on in the rest of the world. I'm doing this,
Right. What was it about that though that turned you off? And I ask because I think you and a lot of other bands that I listened to when I was younger set the scene for me where in the 90s where I was like, well, that stuff doesn't appeal to me either. Right. The idea of, and honestly, being in LA and being close to fame and seeing, or even having friends that have become famous, it does not look appealing.
No, it sucks.
Yeah. But this whole, like, you don't sell out mentality has affected me my entire life and has created the path that I've gone on. And I'm curious where this comes from in you, where it's just like, no, that's not what I want to do.
Yeah. I mean, I don't begrudge anyone their successes. Sure. And I know a bunch of people who got there musically, making a living doing it through pretty normal means, like Pavement. I'm good friends with Steve and those guys. Like I like all those guys a lot. And I think later in their career, they made some decisions that were probably based on, well, we've done everything else. We might as well try doing this, and you can hear it in the music, and I'm talking about music that was great live, but the records are kind of like sculpted in a way to try to round the edges off and make them into something else. And I felt like, it's ludicrous for me to say this about a record like Nevermind or 10, which are sold a gazillion records and everyone loves them or whatever. But to me, listening to it, I'm like, oh, it's that thing that bands do. Because I'd already been through that with like my beloved Psychedelic Furs. They made the first 3 records awesome. Mirror Moves, I like a lot, the 4th record. But they're trying to go Mersh, right? And then the record after that called Midnight to Midnight, which had like the remade version of Pretty in Pink in it, was their biggest record by far to that point, I think. Sucks, And again, those songs, I've heard them live and they're good enough, but the record sucks because you can hear it. You can hear them trying to manipulate what they do to fit some notion of what the marketplace wants or something. And I felt like I felt that way listening to Nevermind. I felt that way, or for sure listening to 10, or Alice in Chains or something, which is interesting with that band because then they made Dirt or whatever, and I think that record's good, or the one with the dog on the cover. Like, for that band, those are good records, and they sound like there's an authenticity to that. I think that wasn't maybe quite there on their first thing, where they felt like they had to have a hit, or something. So
you have all these object lessons in your life, like directly in the scene that you're in, or this band that you loved, where you saw.
Yeah.
I don't want to say pandering necessarily, but you saw them make artistic decisions based on what might sell better.
Yeah, or get too grandiose. Like I remember, like I said, I like the Police and stuff, and like then they put out Synchronicity, and I heard that record, and I like Every Breath You Take or whatever, but at the time at least, and then I was listening to it, I'm like, what is all this fucking bullshit? Like they're just like going off the deep end here, into this like some kind of grand artistic statement. It's like, what happened to all these little, just punch them out kind of songs that they were doing before? And you hear enough bands do stuff like that, and then you realize it's a real kind of pit that's waiting for you if you don't sort of block out everything else and just focus on what you want to do and what makes sense to you.
Okay, well then here's the big question. What made you immune to that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was just that there was no possibility of doing anything for the first let's see, we moved in 90. So I started playing music really in 83. So I spent 7 years, which is a long time, making music in Montana as a kid. And there's what's going to happen? I'm going to get signed. Like, no,
I didn't know. I was naive.
Yeah, we got tapes reviewed in Maximum Rock and Roll or I remember when Scott McCoy from Young Fresh Fellows, he had a column in the Rocket in Seattle, and he wrote about the first Silkworm tape, which is very kind of him. He only wrote about stuff he liked, which I always thought was cool. And he wrote about it, and we were like, oh shit, that's cool. So you would throw things out there, but there was no hope of traveling or doing anything like that. So I think just many years of grinding it out, and I'm really grateful that we had that, because the music wasn't very good for a while, until Silkworm started. Ein Heit had a lot of great music because it was written by John, my friend John, who started the band. But for me and Joel wrote some good stuff, but everything I did during that time was like received and kind of dumb. But I got to work through my juvenilia there. By the time we started recording a Silkworm for real on records, it was like decent, But yeah, I don't know. I really think that formative experience of being in Ein Heit with those guys, because that was a very confrontational band too, like willfully confrontational.
Like confrontational to the audience?
Yeah. John was very great frontman. He died this spring. And just a super important influence on me in terms of how to do it. Like he was a very in-your-face frontman, and people were not always that into what we were doing. The best show we ever did probably was this Battle of the Bands, where we played with about 6 or 7 other, nothing like us. There wasn't anything like us in that part of the country, but absolutely foreign. We were like, you could have just put Martians in there. And the judges were all like, we got like 3s and 4s out of 10 from most of them. And then one guy was like 10, straight 10s, easily the best thing of the entire thing. And then another guy gave us a 10 for originality and all 1s. It was like the perfect response from our perspective, because we knew that it was not something that most of those people should like, And I don't know. I think that was just drilled into me very early, and it never. And also playing with people who were really good, like Joel Phelps is an awesome musician, and Andy's a great musician. And knowing that it was great, and that I loved it, I was like, okay, I don't really care what anybody thinks of it,
Yeah. I mean, look, that's enough for me on some level. I mean, I also am a narcissist in some way. I wouldn't call myself like I don't think I am fully, but like there is this where I'm just like, no, I know this is good, and I also want other people to recognize. Or quote unquote the right people to recognize that it's good.
Yeah, I don't. I don't know. I never cared. And then, later that kind of happened anyway. Like I remember when, I met people like Steve Albini or Steve Malkmus or, the guys in Bedhead, and, and they were like, they got it completely. Yeah, I didn't have to, I never had to explain anything to anyone. Like they were just like, oh yeah, that one thing you did was great. And I'm like, oh yeah, because that's the thing you do there, right? And they're like, yeah, 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 yeah. So, we were just automatically speaking the same language 100%,
Mm-hmm.
and then Pavement was like the iteration of this kind of thing that was like palatable in a certain way. And then, Shellac was like that, and then Bedhead was kind of more embedded with the Worm in that way. And that we were making this weird insular music exactly to our specs, and everybody else was just kind of outside of it. And if they liked it, cool. And if they didn't like it, that was fine too.
Do you think like was this mirrored at home at all? Like with you, when you were growing up, like your dad, you kind of, I don't know if you said it exactly like this, but like he had this entrepreneurial spirit
Mm-hmm.
where he's just going to do the thing he wants to do. And if it succeeds, great. If it doesn't, he'll just find something else.
Yeah, maybe. I think, well, another kind of missing piece of this, I guess, I think about is my parents instilled me with a lot of confidence from a very early age. Like I was really good at school and stuff like that. And uh, they probably pumped me up a little bit too much, honestly. And later in life, not too much later, fortunately, when I was a teenager, I started reading about Zen Buddhism and stuff. And I'm like, I don't think I'm really that important. I don't think individuals are that important. I think it's really
Huh.
you're important. You're important as an element in existence, but me and my shit that I like or don't like, like when I was in the 80s and 90s when fanzine culture was a big thing and people would write about stuff and be mean about things. I wrote about stuff for a while, and then at a certain point I kind of took the Scott McCoy route where I was like, I'm only writing about stuff I like. Like there's no point if I don't like it, who fucking cares? Like
Yeah.
I don't like anything that other people like, really. So, why should they listen to me? If I run down the new Radiohead record or something or whatever it was at that time, no one gives a shit. I'm just being a dick. So, I think all of that kind of combined so that I felt comfortable doing what came to me naturally, but I also didn't feel like other people needed to appreciate it because maybe it wasn't for them.
Yeah. That is the missing piece because I like my parents, if I got an A minus in something, I
Yeah.
would, they would be like, well, did you work your hardest? And I'd be like, well, it's an A minus. I worked as hard. I worked fine. An A minus is fine. And they're like, well, no,
Yeah.
if you didn't work your hardest, then
Yeah.
you didn't do a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. I lost my motivation when I got to college because, well, in high school even, because I shouldn't have gotten a B in high school, but I didn't work that hard because I was working at the record store and I wanted to play records and I wanted to go smoke pot and go drink with my friends and stuff. So I just did that, and I did fine. I did well, but I definitely wasn't on a purely academic course until I went back to school many, many years later, and then I was motivated, and it was probably the way it should have been all along. But, I think they were real hands off in a lot of ways, but they instilled in me like a sense of like, if you want to do something, you should just try it, and if it feels like you're spending your time in a useful way, you should probably just keep doing it, I never really thought about that before, but I think, the unwarranted confidence that they instilled in me probably helped a lot. Yeah.
Did they have any desire for you? Like, did they place anything besides this, like, whatever you want to do, you can do? They were not like, hey, do whatever you want. But also, it'd be nice if you were...
Zero.
Really?
Zero. I mean, they cared about me and what happened to me and whether or not I was fucking up or whatever. But
Sure.
They never... so hands off. But I also think that was kind of a thing that came out of parenting in the 70s. Like, if you watch like Bad News Bears or something like that, that's not fully you know, you watch it today and you're like, oh, they're just letting these kids drink beer in this movie, or whatever. And, the kids smoking or whatever. And that's kind of what it was like. It was real loose. And I don't think it was better. Like, my kid did not grow up that way. I remember talking to her in fourth grade when she got her only B of her entire life, and being like, "Well, if you did exactly what your parents said, like if you did everything you could, and that's you end up with a B, that's fine. But do you think that's what happened?" She's like, "No." I'm like, "All right, well, just try harder next time, and it won't happen." And she hasn't gotten a B. She's a sophomore in college, now. So, but but I helped her do stuff. I've helped her learn calculus. I've helped her whole college search. We were involved in that. We weren't telling her what to do, but we were like, well, here's what we can do. We can make a spreadsheet and blah, 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 blah. Much, much different.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think both are, like, my parents are great, but their version did create a void inside of me that I am I have just replaced my parents with show business, and that I'm just like, I'm trying to get at first it was, I want my parents, I want their approval, and now I want the approval of strangers, executives, or I've just replaced them with a TV executive, or I've replaced them with a iTunes review of a podcast or something like that. And I'm like, please fill in the void just for a moment.
Yeah. I think for me, the void is filled mostly by music, which is just, once you get to a certain point with it, if you don't give up, or if you're only motivated by, it's not even expressing yourself or whatever people say they do with it. It's more just like channeling whatever comes in and putting it through whatever limitations and abilities you might have. And it comes out. And sometimes you're surprised by it. Sometimes it's exactly what you want it to be. Sometimes it's lame. But like, that process is so constant that I just take it for granted. It's like breathing or something, but it's such a stabilizing influence, because stuff like work or whatever doesn't matter as much as it might otherwise. Ups and downs of life, if you have that constant drum beat or guitar thing or whatever going through your whole life, where you're always kind of emitting this stuff, and it's not a trying thing. It's not for me, it's not I need to write, or I need to make something up. It just happens, for better or worse. I don't know. But having that kind of constant flow of something happening in your life is, there's just this bed of stuff that's always there. And I'm really grateful for that. I don't know what my life would be like without it,
Here's another question. I don't know if this is answerable, but that for you, I tend to default on this show when talking to musicians to talking about music as expression, when I know it's not, when it fits many different kinds of things in people. Sometimes it's just fucking around. Sometimes it's someone who does want fame or something like that, and they think this is the right vehicle, whatever. Some people just have a competency or just natural prodigy in some kind of instrument, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then I like the way that you phrase it, though, for yourself, though. It's just this kind of, I don't know if you said this exactly, but you're like a conduit. Like, it's just happening.
Yeah.
It's kind of like channeling through
right.
who you are as a person.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, before you found music, do you think you had that capacity and it just wasn't going anywhere? You didn't know what to do with it. And then you found music and it filled that in? Or do you think that was just some new skill or new facet of yourself that you discovered as you picked up an instrument?
I think it was always there. And I think when I was younger, I would express it in writing and stuff like that. But once you discover rock and roll, for me at least, like, writing's boring, Right. I really admire people who do it and are good at it. My friend John from the Mountain Goats, John Darnielle, he's a very prolific songwriter and stuff, obviously, but he's written 3 novels. And, I remember when the first one came out and Steve Albini was telling me, hey, I read John Darnielle's book. And I was like, oh, yeah. How was it? Because, I automatically assume if someone writes a novel, it's going to be shitty. And I like, good job writing a whole book, but who cares? And he's like, it's great. And I was like, really? Okay. And I read it and it's great. And all of his books are great. So I have a tremendous admiration for that guy being able to do that, especially given he already has this creative outlet that is so, active. But for me, that just seems like dull as dirt. I don't want to sit down and write a book, like music is so immediate. And you can write a song in as much time as it takes to play it sometimes, and then it's done, and you're like, "Oh, neat! That I don't know where it came from, but cool," And it surprises you. It really deeply surprises me all the time, And I'm probably just an easy mark. I'm probably just, you know what I mean. I'm probably easily amused or easily surprised, but it's still a thing where every time it happens, I'm like, "Oh, that cool." Thank you, whatever made this occur,
Yeah,
So,
no, yes, I know exactly what you're saying. So so for you, really, it was like once you found something that was visceral, that
immediate.
satisfied that
Yeah.
that part of you,
Mm-hmm.
that then it was just off to the races.
Yeah, it was immediate, right? And like I said, in the early days, it wasn't good because I didn't really know what I was doing. You do have to. It's sort of like sports in a way, and that I don't think you can. I mean, there are even people who are total outsider artists and playing like a one string banjo or whatever, like they develop a technique for doing it. And until you do that, it's a little haphazard and very hit or miss. And then you sort of start to get a feel for what works and what your limitations are. And then you end up with a voice that's defined as much by what you can't do as what you can do. And then you've got it. You figure out what notes you can sing, you figure out and can't, and then you just stick to that sort of, or not if you want to blow things up, but you just kind of, that's your pile of stuff that you're playing with,
Yeah.
But once that happened, yeah, I think that was it. And that's part of the reason I stopped caring about school. Because,
Okay. Yeah. Final question then. Do you remember when you figured out your style? Do you remember when you were first aware that you had a voice and you were able to express it as opposed to just, I don't know, playing a Psychedelic Furs cover or whatever? Like, I don't know what the transition was for you.
I think it probably didn't happen until, let's see. It sort of started to happen probably in about 88 or 89, the second Silkworm tape we ever made. There's some stuff on there that didn't even get to records later, but it had more of a thing to it, and it was a little more. It wasn't as derivative, and I could tell that I was getting to someplace that felt genuine to me. And then the first song on "In the West" by Silkworm, "Garden City Blues," when I wrote that, and then the big thing was I took it into the band, and the band made it great. Like, Michael played his drum thing on it. It was perfect. I don't remember telling him what to do. I might have suggested something, but and I realized, oh, this is a new kind of music. Like, I don't know too many songs that sound like that. Can't think of any songs that sound like that. And I'm like, I'm not doing something with this. It's like other things. This is the right direction. And Joel was already there, right? He was already writing all this stuff. There's a song called Scruffy on the first Silkworm record that's like that too, where it's like, oh, I accomplished somehow. I don't know how it happened. And then eventually you realize, oh, that happened because you weren't thinking about it. You just it just went boom, and you let it go. And you have to learn to throw them away if they come out and they're malformed, But sometimes you get it and you're like, all I got to do is take this out and put this over here. Done,
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think I would say that 1990-ish probably time. Or our first single was this song Slipstream, and we always used to play it fast, or try to play it fast in kind of this jaunty way that I'd originally written it. And then part of that was working within the limitations of a band, because Michael was never going to be able to play it like that. And we changed it, and it got 100 times better, you know? And that's one of the reasons I think for me, playing in a band is a really critical thing, because they're going to make it their own. And if you're playing with the right people, it's always going to be different and better than you imagined it being. So I love it when that happens. I like being surprised.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. That actually seems like a beautiful place to end. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, right on. Great talking to you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.